everything gets erased, like, nothing gets saved, everything gets erased. It's really actually highly secure, but it's just super inconvenient. Like, none of my accounts remember that I log in.
Yeah,
Okay, we're live.
very annoying.
I
We're
think.
live?
No, I don't. It says we're live. So this is a sloppy introduction. Although on the YouTube page, it's not showing anything.
There's probably a delay.
Whatever.
Okay, we're live. Welcome.
Yes. So we wanted to just quickly, as you can all see, throw together a discussion, and this was honestly my idea just to start because, a little disclosure: I am recently hired as an adjunct professor. It's my first time teaching in this capacity, and it's always been a dream of mine. It's always been interesting, but I kind of am just really there's some things swirling around about the days that we live in and the politics of the day, and I will be teaching political science, and I think that there's challenges that were always present, but like are especially heightened now. And I don't know, just a whole bunch of different things that I kind of just wanted to have a discussion about. And I'm thankful for you joining me, for one thing.
Happy to be here. So, yeah, it's mainly about the difficulty in conversing today, how edgy and, how touchy subjects are, and how tensions run high very quickly in our political discourse. Is that mainly what we're tackling?
Yeah, and like, even this deeper thing about how there's this culture and then also this like counterculture around like post-secondary education. And the culture is around, academic knowledge and pursuit and scholarship and the things that we kind of have agreed upon definitions for. But then there's like the more difficult things about the countercultural aspects where like people doubt sometimes institutions, and I don't know, like, not necessarily that subjects will get brought up that are particularly, like that in the weeds or that controversial necessarily. I mean, I will try to study controversial subjects, but my concern is more so around the level of respect, really the discourse, and we were actually just talking before we came on about the word discourse and why it's important just to have as a title or an approach, because I don't know what the discourse would look like. I mean, and there are some caveats here, like these are all very abstract concerns. Let me just say the caveats with my class are that it is virtual, it will be one lecture a week. You know, the level of engagement, I don't know yet. I hope obviously it's going to be high, but these are abstract concerns that I have walking into this setting.
And it
But
is a gen ed class.
important. Well, I
Is it?
think, honestly, I still am not clear on that. I think my mentor told me it's a requirement in a criminal justice school, not in political science, like in the liberal arts. I don't know. But we will be covering subjects, like the Abbott districts and school funding, which is an important. So Abbott, for those who don't live in New Jersey, Abbott districts are essentially specialized districts that receive or are supposed to receive additional funds from other school districts in the state, because generally they just don't have enough money from their property taxes to pay for their school. Abbott districts have been very controversial for decades. Big priority of the Christie administration, also of the Murphy administration, to kind of come up with some type of like equitable funding. But like that's one controversial subject. But then there are other things too, like about the attorneys generals suing the president. Um, you know, it one thing I think about always, and I'm going to try to be cognizant of, is separating between the teachable moments and the politics. So like really being careful about how I characterize the lawsuits, or really being careful about how I describe the implications. Um, so nobody loses sight of those teachable. Those are the kinds of things. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where it's like, how do I match the art with like making it as objective as I can, given the fact that I am like an avowedly leftist, progressive individual. How do I not let that cloud?
Question about the mechanics. Is this going to be live lectures and everyone's going to be jump in the pool and they'll be able to talk and ask questions in real time, or are you recording it?
So they'll be live, but then recorded and distributed and shared. I don't know. I don't grade the college doesn't, nor do I find it a priority to grade based on attendance. But there will be engagement assignments that help me understand and kind of require that someone be engaged with the text. Although I'm not going to be like heavy into the text, but yeah, it's going to be mostly modal. Um, and you know what I want to make sure that I do is not to be grandiose, but to kind of think a little bit bigger. It's state and local government, but to think a little bit bigger about like the time that we're in. That when we talk about state and local government, on one hand, these are like occupational matters. Many of these students will work in this field of public systems. Um, you know, there's the academic stuff, like it's interesting, but it's also like very socially important, and especially now more than ever.
You won't be able to avoid it. You're going to do this during the presidential election. You know,
Yeah.
your class is going to be taught during November and December.
I'm
Uh,
looking forward to the election. Yeah, I have some
yeah,
special lessons.
it won't be
So I really
avoidable.
want to like hone in on that. And
But
at the same time like not be like one of those like left, well, be using a character, but to describe like what some people might caricaturize like a lefty or leftist professor who's just trying to basically like prognosticate, well, proselytize. That's the word.
yeah.
You
Okay.
know,
So going back, one quick question. I am interested in these times. Is it like you, if you can make it, come to the live lecture, but if you can't, you just get a pre-recorded version of the lecture?
post recorded. So I'm gonna record it and then share it, and they can watch it after the class takes place.
Oh, okay. So there's no like, Professor, I have a question. It would be, they would type
Oh, it's
that.
encouraged. If they're there, they can ask questions.
Oh, so there is a live recording where they can ask questions and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it's both. So it's kind of like a 50-50 model where like half of the college's class time is in-person lectures, and then the other half is essentially some type of like remote engagement. So I have discussion board assignments as well as the lectures, which they can attend live or watch remotely.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
you'll
yeah,
how can the mechanics of a discussion between say students, sometimes two students will have a disagreement with each other. I wonder if that will go very smoothly as it will, you know, in a personal classroom. It's very easy to have a discussion among students. It would probably be a little harder in your case. Do you agree?
yeah, that's realistic. I am going to ask questions and encourage discussion. I will be grading for engagement, so not that not that attendance and appearance is a grading factor, but while someone is in attendance, their level of engagement is going to be considered, not factored in necessarily, but considered in this bigger picture of what engagement might look like. So I am going to be cognizant of that, and I'm going to try to, because again, I really want to treat this a little bit bigger than it is. Um, so I do want to make sure that like I'm honing in on making sure that there's a community. Because honestly, I teach at Ocean County College, and I'm not just saying this because now I'm in, you know, on their payroll, but like it was a it was a school that like many of my political, and the reason I'm still in touch with the professor that I had years ago is because there was in every class really there was like an environment of discussion, and it was actually really important. I feel like because we had some time with the subject matter and then some time just kind of talking through it amongst ourselves, and you know, and actually before we had this conversation I was reminiscing, um, thinking about just some of it was just weird like years ago I remember making jokes about like Alex Jones, and you know we were just talking about it was like in 2012, so this was like during Obama's second term, um, like where like the election I should say for his second term, and I don't know. There was just something really formative about that, just being able to talk about it, like more than just the actual learning of the subject matter. And I don't want to lose that, like in a virtual context. I know
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
you want to preserve what's great about it, about
Yeah,
the
I
normal
know it's some
classroom.
of it's going to happen, but like to the extent that I can save it, and really make the most of this. And I'm also like, you know, I'm like a doe-eyed, you know, this is my first semester. I'm going to change the world. You know, who knows when December comes how I might feel, but I'm pretty uh resolute about that, that like, you know, I want to make this a big experience, you know,
Yeah,
bringing into my like my work with like real life examples, or like, you know, using real examples. In New Jersey I bought a book about state, like the state politics. It's like a history book slash political science book, um, that I can't find, but it's going to be like additional reading, so I'll have kind of added context and stuff. Because this is where it gets interesting for me. Like, this is who people don't have to work in politics, but I think that there's like, being grandiose, there's like this missing piece of like civics and just the basic 101 stuff about like, not politics in terms of like the horse race, because I think that's ridiculous, but like politics in terms of like, how does power get exercised? And especially in the Trump administration, despite what anyone might think about the president, he has done very creative things. And personally, I'd say bad things with the presidency. But I was just listening to a Bill Maher clip earlier today about how Donald Trump took money. I forgot about this, but Donald Trump took money from the Pentagon and had it sent over to fund the wall. These are things that, I spent years learning public administration and political science, and like one president just kind of like took the books and just set them on fire and said he's going to do it his own way. There's like some very interesting lessons in government here in this
Yeah,
time.
and it fits in with a broader trend about the executive branch gaining increasing
Yeah.
amounts of power. That was what the Republicans were talking about during the Obama years,
Mm-hmm.
and Democrats were talking about during the Bush years, is the expansion of federal power increasingly governed by executive order. So
Yeah. And what it means for states, to put it on that context, state politics has been very interesting the last 10 years. At least, again, that's the years that I experienced in real time. I'm not as familiar with the history, but from what I hear from journalists and stuff, even when I watch them or read them, 2010 and 2000, between the time of 2010 and 2020 was a very interesting time across the country in terms of like state legislative power, because we saw redistricting have like a very significant impact on how the maps get drawn and how power gets apportioned among the people. And we saw a lot of one party rule. Primarily, like there was a lot of shifts, to red states during this time. And it's not anything more. And this is again the interesting thing. Like, I want to be careful here about like not going too far in my analysis and just stopping it to say the teachable moment is apportionment and redistricting in the census. Like, it's not some political campaign about like Republicans, blah blah blah.
yeah,
Like, I want to be that's why I'm happy we're doing this, actually, because it's like catching me from myself in that way. That's like a
and
real time example.
you also have state and local government, and it's more specific. So people are more likely to reason honestly and just think through the problem when it's something specific, hopefully, as
Well,
opposed to like national political issues where it's red versus blue and people are very hijacked emotionally, where they feel like you're attacking them if you attack Trump or vice versa.
it's an interesting thing. I think that traditionally that was true. I think now maybe it's a little different. Like, again, the Trump administration has
Politics
made
is
things
made
different.
has expanded
Yeah,
in
well,
some way.
and I even think about like in Texas, the governor Greg Abbott, who resisted for a long period of time having a face mask mandate in his state, and it took basically the whole country, the whole state getting really sick in order for him to say, look, I'm going to have to go against my party here and go ahead and mandate this. Um, and in Florida, the governor is still holding off. And there's policy arguments always. And I think that this thing that's interesting about politics as a as a phenomenon is that it masks itself very well in like policy language. So governors can go on Face the Nation and whatever show they want, and they can rationalize about why they don't enact face mask mandates or whatever stronger policy to mitigate the virus. They wrap it up in some policy language, but the truth is, and the obvious truth is, that these are like political things. Like, if the president were to endorse masks more strongly, governors in red states would also probably follow along. Um, you know,
Well, it's true that, of course, there are certain things that ignite your red brain or blue brain ideology, and masks is one of them. That's a state and local government decision that it's filtered down from national politics into state and local government, and it becomes a litmus test for whether you're team blue or team red. But
Interesting.
the old adage is there's no Republican or Democrat way to fix a pothole. So most of the things that you're going to actually have units on won't ignite that. But it's
Hopefully. I mean,
unavoidable. You're
well,
going to be thinking through COVID. You're going to be thinking through the election.
when I read the textbook, like there were some really interesting takeaways that I think have been like actually really mind blowing. That I just like love sharing with people. But like so the book really kind of like characterizes federalism, which is like the relationship between the national and state government. The book basically describes federalism as like a series of phases, and basically what we've experienced in the last 20 years or so into today is a type of federalism, a type of relationship between these governments that's like very political. It's called ad hoc feminism. I was going to say feminism because I was just watching Blackish about an episode about feminism. Ad hoc federalism. But basically, ad hoc federalism is, it's a type of politics, it's a type of federal structure where like the decisions that are made are not like principled policy decisions generally. They're like political decisions. They're fueled by like politics. Um, you know, like this like the book draws out these really interesting inconsistencies around um arguments for states' rights, but then like the enactment of the Defense of Marriage Act, which is basically like a way of the federal government saying no states, you can't set a definition for same-sex marriage included in marriage. Um
So it's
so like
flexible.
yeah, like well it's this thing that like it's principled until there's a time where you don't need principle or it's inconvenient, and it's created this political, I think this description of ad hoc feminism.
Ad hoc federalism.
Oh my god, Blackish is a good show, guys, and gals. But ad hoc federalism, this description of ad hoc federalism is really interesting today because like, and this is not a Trump thing either, this is a Democrat thing too. Like I think that the politics has just gotten really, I don't know, like just confusing and really transactional and centralized, like highly centralized. One thing that I remember, I don't know if you remember when Justin Amash um, resigned from the Republican Party, and he was doing a bunch of interviews and stuff, and he said, and I've heard this get observed as well, that like the problem really is that the political parties um, just basically coalesce around their leadership. There's basically like no decision that gets made by the party that doesn't have this stamp of leadership, um, which creates like a really interesting environment, and it feeds into a dysfunction that we see as citizens that make us feel like unconfident about the government, um, all these different types of things, and like it's really interesting now. Like it's a position to be in where I have a responsibility to, well, it's self-imposed, but I feel that I have a responsibility to take all of these interesting and really important things and like put it into lesson plans and like make sure people like learn and walk away like caring, um which is like probably ambitious, and unrealistic.
That's the ambition to have.
Yeah.
It may not necessarily come to fruition depending on your students, but that's
Well,
on them. You at least have to make the attempt.
yeah, there'll be criminal, like apparently a lot of my students or a lot of the students who fall into this type of class are like criminal justice students. So again, they will be working in the field, which is good. They'll walk away
Yeah,
with something, I'm sure. But like, I just get, the rant. We all know the
yeah.
rant. Like it's just a very unfortunate time. The it's not just about Trump, but Trump has really shown us a lot of the badder and the uglier parts of the good, the bad, and the ugly of our country. Um, I think, and not just him, but kind of the culture that surrounds him, the political culture that surrounds him and kind of emanates from him. Um, you know, it just sucks, man. Like that's why like discourse from Discord is important too, or whatever we want to call ourselves. But
As far as
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. As far as ad hoc federalism, like for instance the reorientation of the political parties around Russia an example of that? You know, the Republicans were the party of Reagan and the party of the Cold War, really, in
Yeah,
times past, and now it's the Democrats that are tough on Russia, and it's the Republicans that are soft.
it's certainly ad hoc. Well, and I think another example of ad hoc politics is neoliberalism. I was listening to Cornel West speak recently, and he said something to the effect of how the Democratic Party's done a really good job at painting itself as progressive and not really actually changing any of its core principles. Um, and the neoliberal spirit that seems to occupy the Democratic Party has these really interesting inconsistencies. Like where the Democratic Party since the 1960s has really been the party of of workers,
Mm-hmm.
purportedly, but then like these policy agendas that seem to have had a disproportionate benefit on like large corporations and multinational companies. um, it just kind of like shows this weird disjunction between like the policy the domestic policy of how you care for your constituents, like how you cater to your constituents and serve them, and like another dimension of all this, the influence that outside parties and external groups, interest groups have on politicians. But yeah, no, there's certainly an ad hoc element to our politics that today.
Yeah,
the, the,
the crime bill is another example that was pushed through under the Clinton administration, although it was very bipartisan at the time. But you know, both parties really supported that, and the Democrats today are certainly backing away from that.
mhm. And I think that it's just presenting a really it's really interesting to think about. Like I used to not really like before I got this job, I actually really didn't think that much about political science as a subject. Um, of course I thought about it in the context of like the day to day, the exercise of power stuff. But to really think about political science as kind of like to think about politics as a phenomenon that exists and shapes society and is shaped by society, it's really interesting to think about like how one of the things that gets drawn out in the book is how politics has really become something that like has gotten into our lives. The book doesn't get into that specifically as much, but like there's some definitely references to that phenomenon, and also about how it's pervaded the state and state politics in particular. But like it's obvious, into our lives, it's affected us, and in a different way. Like politics, if you like, in the 19th century, people were fighting on the Senate floor. There were people being assaulted. One man, I don't remember the names of these senators, but one senator beat another senator with his cane on the Senate floor.
Yeah,
um but even then, it just there has to be something different now. Like
social media, man,
the level of well, I have, yeah, I
it's a
definitely
big
think the
one.
social media piece is a huge one. you know but like it's gotten to a point where like people can't even talk and disagree.
Yeah,
It's actually a really unfortunate thing. I want conservatives in my class to feel like they have a space to talk how they want, not talk to 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 put forth their arguments, in a way that doesn't they don't automatically just get discounted
yeah.
because someone's a Trump supporter and
It,
wears a
it, it,
MAGA hat.
it will be impossible to do that, especially in a college classroom. But in our society in general, there's a pervasive sense of shame that surrounds being a Trump supporter, and it's something you tend to button your lip in mixed company about.
Do you believe in this? Have you ever heard of the notion of the shy Trump supporter?
No, I haven't heard of that. Although,
So
in general terms, I'm
yeah,
describing it.
so the shy Trump voter is this voter, that essentially doesn't ever answer to polls that they're a Trump supporter, but secretly is.
Yeah,
And the shy voter is part of the explanation purportedly for 2016 and how Trump won. And The Hill, actually, Rising, does a few segments of this regularly about the shy voter, and if or if not they still exist today, or if pollsters have been able to like suss that out. um you know and it kind of just it made me that when you said it, people are afraid. I don't. I think I don't know that. I don't know. I feel like Trump voters are usually pretty vocal, but there probably might be people who are a little shy. I don't know. I feel like what Trump has done that's very interesting, at least in my opinion, is he's dug this line where like you're really effing with him or you're really effing not with him. Um, you know, and there's I think you've mentioned this as well, but like there's a narrowing. When you look at different types of polls, you can see that the gap between Biden and Trump is starting to narrow a few points. But um, I don't know. I think the Trump base is just such a concrete base that it's only going to be that, and it's only going to be chipped away. Like I don't think there's any additional growth that can come, or that there are like people hiding. Um, I don't know. I don't
But
know. We'll see.
the reason that the Trump voter exists is because they're reading the room and they're smelling the fact that you shouldn't be a Trump supporter. That this is a bad guy. This is not someone you want over your house for dinner. He's vulgar. He's brash. He's an asshole. And I think people see that, and they see that he's. It would be wrong. It would be embarrassing to be outed as a Trump supporter for a lot of people. I think there is a pervasive sense of that. But then there also is like the loud and proud guy. But for the most part, you're dealing with teenagers in early 20s, and most people in that age group are liberal. You're very liberal, and you won't people won't be able to help but sniff that out. So if you're a 19-year-old Trump supporter, I think you're going to read the room too and know that if you make a claim in favor of Trump, you are going to get cross-examined in a harsher way than someone who pronounces their allegiance to Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I will discourage all of that. If that being
Or wanting to
putting
cross-examine
down,
everyone equally, right?
you know,
Wanting to, you know,
well,
but
I mean, part of it is putting Trump in a positive light for some things. In the context of what we're talking about in our classroom. Um, you know, maybe there are things that Trump was able to do for states that has been positive. I don't know that to be the case, but I certainly don't. I'm sure some states, are have benefited from his policies or something, or like not even that necessarily, but the politics that he brings to the table about like, you know, I don't want to use the language America first, but some type of nation-centered policy orientation
yeah,
when you think about foreign policy.
populism. Populism is popular on the left right now. Thomas Frank has a new
Yeah,
book out about that. You know, Crystal and Sagar from The Hill are certainly populist. They're not Trump fans, but they're saying, okay, it wasn't such a great idea when we had global free trade and we just sold our own
those kinds of
manufacturing
things. Yeah.
base out of yeah. And Trump spoke to something real there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that Trump one thing that fascinates me about Trump that I honestly I do think is a good thing that the Trump presidency has provided is that he has shown us A, how vulnerable our systems are, and B, how the power of will is really a significant factor in addressing systematic issues. I would obviously I don't endorse any of his specific policies, but well, at least that come to mind quickly. I don't know, but um, because the Children's Bureau has taken an approach that's a little different, and I do want to represent that. But in any case, um, I think that like he's shown us that like this is the same thing that got me about Bernie Sanders that made me so attracted to him as a candidate. When you just have a person who can just go in and just not make decisions, but like kind of come in with a certain political culture and bring in a certain like cabinet, do things. It kind of transcends like what anyone can write on paper in terms of policy, and it changes like the culture of our government. Um, he's shown us that that can happen. Like maybe not in a good way, but it can definitely happen. The Trump administration looks very different from the Obama administration and virtually every administration before it. You know, and it's really just because of the willpower of this
And the party looks
person.
different. The entire Republican Party is shaped around his image. So
There
you
is, yeah,
can't.
there's a significant question. Another thing looking into the future that's interesting is both parties are dealing with a tug of war internally, but what is the Republican Party going to look like after 2020? Because, you know, they can either go back a little bit in terms of
Well,
not voting for Trump, or they can
are,
just be dissolved.
are you assuming that Biden is winning then?
Yeah, oh yes, I assume Biden is going to win.
I don't don't say it. Don't jinx it. I have a bet that
I've
Biden will
got a
win,
lot of wood
but
that I'm knocking on.
yeah, knock wood. Um, but okay, I want to return to something more like mechanical. Do you think that just the mechanics of your classroom? Do you think that people will be able to have civil discussions? Will it facilitate civil discussions to have people in separate Zoom chats the way you and I are? Or will it make them nastier to each other in the way that, say, something like Twitter does? Or will it be
No,
the same as the classroom?
I would want to have large group discussions in any, like, it's not like we have many students, frankly. Like I have
Oh,
10
it's a small
students.
classroom?
Small class, small
Oh,
class.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, nothing big.
It's more
Maybe
like a graduate seminar.
yeah, it's a relatively small class, but I
More
think that
manageable.
presents an opportunity. And that's again like why I don't really want it to be like me talking for an hour, because like that's not interesting, and also that's not where the lessons are. Um, the book is not hard, so I'm gonna really like push that the book gets read, and I have many assignments to verify that. But yeah, no, it's small class. One day maybe, but
It's going to be interesting because, like, there's kind of a presence that a professor has in a room. They're standing, the professor is standing, everyone's seated, it's at the front of the class.
yeah.
On Zoom, you're just one Zoom window among many. And you also look young. So it's going to be sort of funny. It could be like really open it up and make it more democratic and more like a big discussion group.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because one thing I really do try to be cognizant of when I present is my youth. Honestly, like I put memes in my presentation slides. I make jokes. I really try not to be like stuffy. Um, so no, I agree. I think that helps bring something to the table. Like, and there's also like this story, right? Like, not to be like cheesy, but like I graduated from OCC like 6 years ago. So it's kind of like this coming full circle
Yeah.
around, like, this is the school I graduated from. Now I can give back, and hey, you can do it too. Um, which I'm not trying to like take away from. Like that's very significant for me, but there's definitely that element that I think will make me a differently engaging professor. Probably, hopefully, a good one. Um, in the classroom, I'm sure it would be even better, but um, you know, hopefully next semester, but probably not next semester either. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it depends. It is a scary thing a little bit. Thinking about COVID in terms of like flu season, and people going back to school, like the schools that have opened. There are some reports about outbreaks at certain schools, so interesting times. I am. I don't know. I guess it's like impossible to speculate at this time, but I feel like January. I don't know what the world can look like by then, but I can.
Yeah, cross that bridge when we get there. I have no idea.
I have no
But
idea.
I think on the bright side, people are getting used to the mechanics of Zoom, and hopefully people are comfortable. The classrooms in general, you have a hard time getting students to speak up, especially if they're younger, like
Yeah.
freshman, sophomore. But in a smaller environment, and hopefully they're comfortable on Zoom, they're actually just in their house.
Well, that's why I want to
They
really
can be
bring up
more engaged.
politics, like political issues of the day, because like I think that people don't speak when it's like, so I think that there's like the theory of political science, but then there's just the things that happen, like the so-called kitchen table issues. I really want to make sure I highlight those, because people care about them. um you know Everyone cares about them. Everybody cares about how money gets spent by the government. Everybody cares about, how the government administers its voting systems, um, or how it like regulates its resources, water, land, etc. Um, so I want to make sure I'm like bringing in news articles, things like that, and taking it away from the textbook in a lot of ways. The book is incredible, though, I have to say. Um, but it's incredible being the first book that I've ever read about political science, like an instructor's book. So I guess I don't have that much knowledge, but yeah, I really want to draw like people out. I really want to make it interesting because this stuff matters, and I think that like there's deeper issues that I tie back to the discourse today, and not getting the right lessons or not getting the proper lessons during school. Like I think if people, it doesn't, no one has to become a political consultant or something, but like just understanding like the federal balance, state, national, local, Native Americans, um, understanding basic things like I'm not presuming what anyone knows who's going to be in the classroom, but like I just want to make sure that there's at least a floor that people walk away knowing. Um, and yeah. And this is actually really helpful. I do want to say one thing that's really fascinating to me that I thought today as well. Um, One thing that the Trump administration has done that's really interesting is that because the Trump administration has been very creative in its policy administration, it's almost like necessarily given us a lot of like teachable moments. Like I think about with the family separation policy. um, I didn't know that there was an office called the Office of Refugee Resettlement, but lo and behold, when the president takes children from their families at the border, those children end up in the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is in Health and Human Services. Um, or like when the president wants to disrupt the census and like put in a question that's racist and meant to disincent like discourage people from participating in the census. Um, Excuse my characterization.
You can't do
Um,
that in the classroom,
I can't do that,
but you
but
can do
like,
flip here.
but I didn't know that the census was administered by the Department of Commerce. And it makes sense that it would be, but it it's a department within the Department of Commerce. Um, the Obama administration, there are those little kind of like lessons and stuff, but just not really as much. I don't know. Maybe it's just a press thing. Like maybe many more people are covering the Trump administration because of all the foibles and stuff. But um, I think that people get. I think people are learning without realizing it, and it's just a matter of starting to connect the dots. I'm hoping that that's the case. I
Yeah.
hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, these people are all the deep state, and hopefully Trump will drain the
The
swamp and
census
get rid
question
of them.
is meant, though. The census question was meant to discourage people from participating in the census,
What was it?
asking about citizenship in the census,
Oh,
asking if the
they asked if
participants.
everyone is a citizen
Yeah,
in
that's
your
what they
household.
proposed. Yeah, so they were going to propose. The Department of Commerce had a proposal to include that as a question on the census, the decennial census. And the Supreme Court said, like, I mean, you can, but you didn't give a good reason to do it this time. So the Supreme Court basically said no. Um, and now the president's trying to do it in some other way, a few other ways. But yeah. So an interesting thing about that situation is that the idea came from a Republican political consultant and a lawyer, um, and the conversations got discovered because he passed, and his daughter was just going through his estate, and she found those documents and called someone, I think a journalist or something. Um, and the story broke that the president and Wilbur Ross basically got this advice from a consultant, and the advice was a way of basically cutting people off of how resources get allocated because the census matters by capturing residents, not citizens, um, and the Constitution says nothing about citizens, to be clear, but basically capturing fewer residents and spending less money. And there's like this partisan thing about like the Hispanics are probably going to vote Democrat anyway. Um, so there's like racist is a well, racist is is an example of a time where maybe the characterization is not appropriate in the classroom. Like maybe that's a proper characterization, but not for the classroom. So it's a good catch, and I appreciate that. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
these are the kinds of
you're
things.
you're in your rant mode. You can slip into rant mode very quickly, and you
These are the
have to catch
things.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. These are the things. That's like very helpful for me. Well, because I can go into rant mode. There's a way
you
for me to go
can.
into
There's
rant
a way.
mode
There's a way to do it. You're right.
without invoking that at that time. Like there are obvious things, and just to be clear, that the president does that are racist. Like the squad, that was a racist statement. Like talking about AOC, Ayanna Presley, um,
Yeah,
and
they
the
should go
other.
back to their countries or something. Was it that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Ilhan
Yeah,
Omar. Yes, that they should go back to their countries.
yeah,
And meanwhile, they were all American citizens. Well, except for Ilhan Omar, who's a naturalized citizen. She's not born in the country, but um,
but yeah. The other ones are native born,
they all, yeah,
American born.
you know, and these interesting things that he does, like where how he has these very interesting responses to questions about QAnon, or the really interesting response he had to that question about that article that was trying to make the argument that Kamala Harris is not technically qualified to be the vice president. Um, and he basically said like, "Well, I've heard the article. Like I don't know anything about it.
The
Like,
law professor who wrote it is brilliant, though.
yeah, like just these really squishy
Yeah,
non-endorsements. Um,
but
but
just
like,
this way of signaling that hey, there might be something to this, but
yeah,
I'm not going to say it.
he does it very skillfully.
Yeah, or he does like the some people are saying. Some people are saying this.
These are all interesting political lessons. Like, there's the way to go on a diatribe and talk about what it means and yada yada. But like, Donald Trump is actually a very
Yeah,
strong politician. He's very effective.
yeah. Scott Adams thinks he's a great persuader. I find that he can't persuade us very well, but he persuades a lot of people. I think he can read a room well. I think he's a great marketer and
I think he's
brander.
very different. He's still very different. Like, he's still not a politician. Um, like a politician is someone who, well, maybe he is in some degree, but like not in the kind of really polished like manufactured way that many of the establishment are. I think he just spoke just this thing that like no one in the world ever could have, like him, about like people's discontentment with politics and a level of distance and maybe ignorance from our government.
Yeah,
um,
that's something you want to address. How are you going to try to the type of student who says politics is a dirty game, they're all liars, they're all out for themselves, they're just big fat cats, and there's an even more extreme version of that, which is that none of this even matters. There's really a shadow government over top of all of this. It's just like the puppet on the right or the puppet on the left. How do you deal with that kind of cynicism that is widespread really throughout the political landscape?
I mean, I share it in some way, but like I just think that it's bad today, but that doesn't mean it's bad inherently. And it doesn't mean it'll be bad tomorrow. I think if we want to make a good tomorrow, it's actually about understanding politics and like thinking about as a progressive, or thinking about as maybe someone who's on the political right. Like, what can you do to like shape the party, even by voting? Like, voting is a
Yeah,
simple way that like doesn't get exercised in the most effective way all the time, but like, where like voting has a very undersized impact because relatively few numbers of people vote, but it's large numbers of the same cohort. There's really not a lot of diversity in the polls. Like, you know, and I think that like there are opportunities to make change. Like, there are many examples of this on the right and the left. Donald Trump is an example on the political right in some way. Um, AOC is an example on the political left. Of how one person can have like a very significant impact on an institutional level, but like also us as individuals. when we talk about state and local government, and I myself even need to do a better job at this, but like that's really where the levers are for us to pull as citizens and have influence and power. You know, a lot of attention gets put on the national government and Congress, and they don't do that much because it's a highly dysfunctional system, but also institutionally there are like limits to their power and there are separations of power and all that stuff. The significant thing that we need to do, and it's hard to do right now in COVID, but like is kind of mobilize on a state level and do all that and change it and whatever. But like it's not impossible. It's just the system. I mean, it's a truth. It's a truism. Like the system is broken. I mean, it's not, you know, and it's not like a but the takeaway shouldn't be give up hope. The takeaway should be we can be the authors of a better future, if we can kind of like collaborate and respect each other, all that stuff. That like
Yeah, I, I,
hokey.
I would say those those hokey old ideals are
Yeah.
things you need to inculcate in your students because I think they hear already over and over that the system is broken. It's all a dirty game. And look, you'll inevitably include some of that in your lessons, but including concrete examples of people and groups wanting to change something and actually changing, people grabbing levers of power in certain ways, and also people being invigorated by a sense of citizenship, a sense of like if we work together and do something and care about the fact that we are all Americans, we can accomplish things.
Well, you know, and I mean, these are things that I can directly draw from in my work. Like, I work with an organization that does like grassroots advocacy and like, you know, youth engagement. And there are like many examples of how the power of foster youth voices have been influential in Congress and like bills that recently, just a few months ago, a bill got introduced directly as a result of a town hall that like the National Foster Youth Institute, which I work for, was able to organize. So I think it's just, and I'm actually doing a workshop this week about like a process called like power analysis. So like there, power analysis is essentially like a way of systematically identifying stakeholders, mapping them out, and then strategizing how to advocate. But like there's all these different tools that we can do, and like it's unfortunate that like we have to pour ourselves into changing democracy so much, but that's why we should change democracy. So
Yeah,
like it's not this thing that like only masters of public administration and like, you know, Ivy League educated professionals can change, you know, structurally. Like this needs to we need to pour ourselves into this so we can change it for the people and change it for everyone else so it's more accessible, etc. You know, it but the call to action is because it's broken. Um, you know, and there are many examples to draw from.
it's easier to do when the enemy is the Germans or the Japanese or something. During World War II, I'm not in a racist way. I'm referring to World War II
Yeah,
when
no. I know what you're saying.
yeah,
It's like a national.
yeah, when there's kind of like an obvious enemy. I mean, I think I see what Trump is doing when he calls COVID the invisible enemy. He's trying to
Yeah.
make a sense that we have some tangible thing to fight. And Americans do much better at that time. Bill Nye was on NPR the other day and he was talking about how at the time it's all anyone was ever talking about was World War II. How are we going to win this battle? And you had victory gardens and victory bonds, and you had an enormous mobilization of women in the workforce, and supply lines and cooks, and people mobilized and they did it. And the same thing with the moon landing. You know, we mobilized and we accomplished things. And those are kind of the glory days of America in many respects, the middle of the 20th century. And I think that sense of engaged citizenship, that real
Mhm.
old fashioned civic stuff, is really lacking today. And that
Well,
it
you know,
sounds hokey, but you
and
need
it's
to
really
slash it.
interesting because it doesn't have to be hokey or old fashioned anymore. Like I think that there's a special opportunity now to like lean into the equity aspects because I think prior examples have really been, you know, how do I say, like monoracial. You know, like the civil rights movement was largely led by black people. The women's suffrage movement was largely led, although with the help of black civil rights activists and activists and advocates, the women's suffrage movement was led by white women. I think we can do grassroots organizing in a way that's like equitably minded and like does all these things that like I don't think our government's prepared to address. Like one thing that I've been really interested by, and maybe we should end it here, is like I don't know if ever heard of Dissent magazine. Um,
No, you mentioned it recently though.
oh, did I? Then I
Liberal.
probably already told you about this. There's a show called Belabored. They have a podcast called Belabored, and it's basically about like labor organizing, and it's just really blown my mind because I think that like that's what you just asked or what you just brought up. Like the answer is labor organizing and grassroots organization. Like at least how I see it, because I think that these like big scary political machines like people they're difficult, there are barriers to entry and there are limits to their power, but like what gets untapped and exploited is the labor of people. And we've already seen the horrid inequities that come about with like essential workers and how there are like racial disproportionalities that come along with that. um Not even just about race things, like the white steel workers, in Detroit, the auto workers, the coal miners, everyone has that political capital that gets untapped, and there's really not a place for in our democracy. And it's really interesting to think about how we can change that and we can create a space for that as like a place for political capital, because it's underutilized. And I think that's the answer to a lot of these questions. It's not about like forming a committee and like doing a power analysis. Not everyone's going to do that. Not everyone should do that. um, Nor should those things be sanctioned only to professionals. But the thing is that I can't do as a bookish whatever is I can't do there's just there's a lack of like I can't do the on the ground stuff. Like I can't do the convincing of family members to go out and vote. My students should do that and can do that, and hopefully will be encouraged to do that. All these different types of things. That's where it gets hokey. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, lots of old
doesn't
school,
have to be.
more economic liberals. I think of Barbara Ehrenreich and Thomas Frank, who are more populist in orientation and come from that kind of like New Deal Democrat tradition, are all about labor unions and bemoan the modern Democratic Party, which is reorganized, especially under Clinton, to be more of a party of young urban elite professionals. And our country is increasingly being predominated by you're either stuck in the rusted out center of the country, or you move and you get a really good salary in New York or Chicago or LA or something like that. And yeah, hopefully labor organization is a way forward. I think of Andrew Yang's project. He wrote a book called Smart People Should Build Things, about how your tech startups, you shouldn't all go to Silicon Valley. You should go to the middle of the country and produce jobs. It's definitely going to be a big part of bringing the country together.
Yeah,
Labor organization.
it's interesting. These are interesting challenges, and I don't want that to get lost by my students or by anyone for that matter, because it's not just about like a fun conversation. It's about important matters in the future and all that stuff. And COVID is very scary. Like I want our students. I don't know. I just want there to be. I have a lot of dreams for how I want this class to turn out, and I hope that it turns out. Um, and part of it was helping me process some of my. There are still things swirling, but just some of the thoughts, and thinking about how I describe and characterize in real time, and being filtering in that way. So interesting, good stuff. Really good stuff. I don't know if you have like any closing thoughts or something.
No,
I
I
didn't really
think
have like
that's
an
it.
agenda. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah,
the one person who watches this, thanks.
thank you. Yeah,
This is more for me than anyone.
it's a Dear Diary episode,
Yeah,
but I appreciate it. I had fun.
that was for the public. Well, we should do this again. Especially what I really want to do one day. I'm thinking and not trying to put you on the spot because I can do this with anyone. I would love to just pull up a bunch of polls. I've been tracking poll data and just like tracking patterns in a document. And I really want to just like dig into it one day and just spend like half hour to an hour just thinking about like from a layman's perspective, how to interpret polls and recognize patterns and stuff. I will also do this for my students. But I think it's interesting because 2016 was a lot of people with heads up their own behinds and not questioning data deeply. At least that's how it seemed, and hopefully maybe I can we can question. It's interesting. I'll
Yeah,
talk with you about you or anyone who really would be interested. But yeah, we should try that one day. We're still live.
that would be
We
interesting.
should we should not be live.
Yeah,
So we will not be live anymore. Thank you all for joining us or joined us for whatever time you did. Stop.